All right. How's everyone doing? Woo! All right, before we begin, proud tradition, we have to inflict on Brian. This is his first game, SoundCon, so if we could just get...
The wrong conference there.
I'm sorry, I had 4 hours of sleep last night because we're at MAGFest. This is his first MAGFest. If we could give Brian just a little bit of that Colossus energy. Just very good. So we will be implementing that at Game SoundCon moving forward, just letting you know.
If it breaks out spontaneously, I'll know who started it.
I have an alibi. Everyone, my name is Mason Lieberman. I am a video game composer and audio director, and I'm so thrilled to have as one of our special guests here at MAGFest this year, the illustrious, legendary Brian Schmidt. Brian is one of the original video game composers, sound designers, and technologists, and has been a driving force behind the technology, the compositional evolution, and just kind of everything in the world of video game audio. This guy is like a huge, huge legend. To start very generally, some of the titles that you may or may not recognize that he's involved with, he was the lead composer and sound designer for things like Black Knight 2000, Space Station, Narc, Fire, Big Guns. His main theme for Narc was covered by the Pixies, which is, I believe, the first time a major label band had covered a video game theme up to that point. In '98, he joined Microsoft, where he was the program manager for direct sound and direct music, which then led to him becoming the primary audio lead and person pushing the audio platform forward when the Xbox as a console was greenlit. So before there was an Xbox, Brian already was Microsoft Audio. And Brian was pivotal in defining and building out the Xbox platform. The sound card, the decisions to implement surround sound, first time it was done in a console. A lot of these things came directly from Brian Schmidt. So today we have a really cool opportunity to deep dive into the history of how a console gets made and what those kind of conversations look like at levels that are not usually exposed to the public. So everyone, let's give a really warm welcome to Brian Schmidt. Also, continue bragging on you. Lifetime Achievement Award from the Game Audio Network Guild, created Game SoundCon, the largest video game audio conference in the world. So many other things that we're not even going to be able to get into in this panel. Absolute wizard here. Next year. So to start, let's just begin at the very beginning. How about we hit that next slide and just play a sound? Iconic sound, you made it, and I actually want, before we even get into the backstory of how everything happened, I want to start with this sound that kind of brought us all into the world of Xbox. Was this a recorded piece of audio that you had synthesized, or was it perhaps running in real time?
It wasn't the former. So we were building an Xbox, and one of the really key things that was drilled into us is that this is not a PC, it's not a PC, it's not a friggin' PC. PCs were, the press was gonna say Xbox is gonna blue screen, it's gonna take 2 minutes to boot, like Windows 95. So they really were impressing on us, we gotta get up and running quick, and so the wizards, some of the top programmers at Microsoft actually managed to shrink Windows down to about 170 kilobytes. Just throwing out all the crap and leaving kind of the core kernel of an OS. And because of a weird quirk of how the hardware was designed, the only memory that was available on the Xbox during the boot sequence, which we got from 2 minutes down to 8 seconds, was this ROM, this read-only computer chip on the motherboard that only held about 256 kilobytes of data. And so the OS was about 170, the visuals was about 70 more, something like that. And at the end of the day, there was about 28 kilobytes left to do the boot sound. And if any of you know digital audio,
It's not a
28
wave
kilobits
file.
is like a second of 8-bit mono audio. So that wasn't going to work. So what we ended up doing was, there's this really cool sound chip. It beat the PlayStation 2 like nobody's business. So it's sitting there, and so what I ended up doing is I did a lot of work, as Mason said, on arcade games. I actually have my own sound driver for like the Genesis and arcade systems, Super Nintendo. I actually ported that over to the Xbox, like at the last minute, and basically did the same thing I used to do to arcade games, which is have lists of notes. I think I've got some here. Lists of notes that basically say, at this time, load this patch and play this sound. This is actually source code from the actual original boot sound.
So this is how you wrote this piece of music / sound design. This is how you created it for frame
Yeah,
of
this
reference.
is.
There was no DAW.
This is how we define patches, right? Oh, there's a sawtooth patch. I'm going to call it Saw 3. It's got some envelopes and all this other stuff. Where's the opening? So at the very beginning of the Xbox sound, it opens up without whomp. And if any of you are sort of sound savvy, this is the part that does that. Actually, is it this part? No, that's the throbbing bass, not the wah bass. There's the wah for opening. No, that's the whoosh.
The whoosh.
That's the
bubbling
bubble.
sound. Fast
It's in here
noisy
somewhere.
stuff.
Here we go. So I play a note. I increment the cutoff frequency of a filter on the sound chip. I ring out for a little bit, and then I loop that a bunch of times, and so that's the sound of wah opening up. And so over the course of about a weekend, everything was happening super fast. From the day Xbox was green lit to the day it hit the store shelves was about 18 months. And nobody had thought about the opening animations or sequence, and so I think the date on this file is like middle of July 2001.
And it came out, was it November?
November 15, 2001. And
So-
when we had to manufacture them and ship them on a boat to toy store, to Toys R Us and whatever. So it came in really the only real creative direction we were given is that the Xbox was supposed to be this power yearning to break free into your living room. And so that's kind of what the visuals did. Look at that once again. Sort of mechanical, organic instrument. And I did a version of it that did not have the little ding, 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 and everybody said, it needs a little jingle at the end.
Yeah. And those people were correct, and we thank them for it.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the beginning now that we've given kind of a little bit of context for people, and let's talk about how this all came together. So, first of all, just to make sure that I have it said right for everyone, what was your role on the original Xbox?
I was the audio program manager, so I was responsible for kind of all things coming out of the speakers for Xbox. From about when Xbox was a PowerPoint deck.
And before that, in fact, because you had joined Xbox, or you joined Microsoft prior to there being an Xbox project.
Yeah.
So can we actually start and tell the story really quickly of how you went from composing for pinball machines and arcades and consoles to becoming the program manager on all things audio for Xbox? What did that journey look like for you? How did you join Microsoft?
I got a call out of the blue. They just said, Brian, why don't you come to Seattle? So there was a period of time in the late 90s where Microsoft really wanted to make Windows a great gaming platform. This was back when the big talk was, our game console is going to become obsolete. You know, people are really saying, is the Genesis and Super Nintendo the last generation of game console? Because Windows will be the perfect game experience always, right? So I spent a lot of time looking at the Microsoft had made some technologies. In fact, we're talking about that in a couple days, the sound card wars of the 90s.
Super cool panel. Definitely come through for it.
So I ended up doing a lot of work with a 3D audio company. I'd been studying 3D audio since college. The 3D audio is the big tech on sound cards. It's sort of like a surround sound without surround sound speakers. So I spent a lot of time studying and analyzing this system that Microsoft had put out. That was, I had my number of critiques. And then apparently Microsoft was reading these reports I was writing and said, hey, why don't you come out and fix the thing instead of...
instead of calling us out, why don't you put your money where your
Yeah.
mouth is and work for us?
Yeah. So, again, I went out to interview, and next thing I knew, I was flying my wife and 9-month-old son out to Seattle from Chicago.
And you were at Microsoft the better part of a year before the Xbox project kicked off, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I was responsible for the DirectX, which was the gaming technology, particularly Direct Sound and Direct Sound 3D, and then Direct Music. And a lot of what we did, in addition to inventing the technology, is sort of flying around and telling people how to use it and stuff. And I was coming back, been there about 9 months, and we'd done one of these in London, and Seamus Blakely and Kevin Backus, who are also there, they were part of the DirectX gaming group. And they're like, hey, Brian, we want to show you something. We know you did a lot of work in consoles before Microsoft. And they showed me this PowerPoint deck in a London pub. It was called Project Midway. And it was basically, hey, we think Microsoft should do a game console. We think that's a business Microsoft should be in. And so I was like, they're like, are you interested in getting involved? And I was like, fuck yeah. So in the arcade game in 16-bit days, you kind of had to be pretty computer literate. I have a CS degree as well as a music composition degree. So that's kind of how I was able to do those early games. And so a lot of the technical stuff was very interesting to me. And so the idea of starting from scratch and building the sound system for a game console was just like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. So over the period of the next couple years, they convinced Microsoft to make an Xbox.
So you're coming in at the very beginning of this project, and I want people to have an understanding, because when we think of Microsoft, we're thinking of a mammoth, super corporation with 10 gazillion people on it, and we're thinking of Xbox as this monolith thing that it has become. How many people shipped the original Xbox, if you had to say?
The main design team, it says marketing, developer relations, hardware, software, it got to about 150. I joined when it was about 25, when we were sort of drawing plans out. And it was not Microsoft at all. To be frank, when I got to Microsoft, and I was like, hey, I'm going to do this stuff, and it's like, this is not really that fun being at Microsoft. Because everything was very, like you just said, it's big and bureaucratic, and Windows is a very slow boat that just is very hard to turn. But Xbox was really different. We really wanted to make... Microsoft wanted to own the living room. One of the first things I did when I was at Microsoft was look at what audio technologies would we need to have a Windows PC in the living room be successful. Again, the Xbox didn't exist yet. And so I'm talking to Dolby, and how would we deal, because I thought surround sound was this thing we really needed in games, because games had been moving from 2D to 3D, and sound hadn't really followed so much yet.
Games did not have surround sound at this point in time. Brian's actually the first person who brought that technology.
That's exaggerating a little bit.
But I wasn't there. I can say what I want.
Right. Surround sound became necessary as games moved from 2D to 3D. And so in the PlayStation 1 era, you get little hints of it, but it's either it's called matrix encoded, like Dolby Pro Logic, or it's just like the PlayStation could play surround sound, but only in a pre-rendered cutscene. It couldn't do it interactively. The PlayStation 2. So we wanted to make sure that we had sort of those sorts of technologies that were available to the Xbox. But yeah, it was when we shipped, it was about 150 people. So it was like they literally put us, once we got officially greenlit, they put us in a building separate from the rest of Microsoft. They gave us permission to basically say, talk to us in 5 years to any other department of Microsoft that came to us. And we had everybody coming. The SQL Server team wanted to be on Xbox. Explorer wanted to be on Xbox, of course, and we're like, no, we're about games. If we don't say no to anything that isn't games, we're not going to ship the Xbox on time.
And you had 18 months, so this was like a really, really quick process when all is said and done.
It was like a startup. The teams were very small. There was very little bureaucracy. They trusted people to make decisions about how should the software architecture be, what should the hardware architecture be, who should we use for chip vendors. Those were all made very, very quickly.
So it goes without saying, but I want to say it explicitly, how much agency did you have in that type of environment as the head of all things audio to define the mission, scope, and vision?
It was I don't want to say absolute, but they simply trusted. I worked a lot with a couple other people, Scott Selfon and Chanel Summers, who were very, very tight in developer relations. So they were sort of all things audio, talking to game developers. So again, there wasn't time to futz around or make lots of PowerPoint presentations to middle management to evaluate these things. It was, here's what we need, here's options we could use to do it, and then here's how we ended up making it.
What were your top priorities when you were establishing that vision and initial scope for the Xbox? Like, when you were putting, we'll say, the audio slide into that deck of this is what audio will be like for Xbox, what were the most important things to you and things that Microsoft was really trying to capture?
This was the slide.
Oh.
I can only show this because I happened to give a talk that used this slide at Northwestern, when I was still at Microsoft. There were a couple priorities. One is we really wanted to turn the page in game audio. Game audio to that point was really when something happens in a game, you play a WAV file. That was kind of about it, which, without getting technical, doesn't work. It just makes everything sound like Street Fighter or a 90s arcade game. Our goal was to see if we could put a full recording studio on a chip in the Xbox. And so before Xbox actually existed, I made this slide as to what we wanted the software architecture for direct sound to look like. So it's got a synthesizer to synthesize music. It's got lots of mixing channels. It's got lots of DSP effects, equalizers and compressors and all the kind of stuff you see, reverbs, you see in a recording studio. You need to put that inside the game because anybody who creates game sound now knows that that's just, of course you need to do that. But at the time,
This was novel.
it was novel because the CPUs couldn't do that yet. It really was, in game audio back then, we're always fighting. There's not enough CPU, there's not enough memory. And so as we start to have more powerful processors and we start to have more memory, both physical memory and also what do the games ship on, right? Games on the Xbox shipped on DVD. That's about 4.2 to 7.8 gigabytes, which was a giant sea change for audio. So we could actually start doing some of these things, and we could make a chip like this affordably. And it turns out that apparently after seeing this at a Windows hardware engineering conference, NVIDIA had started building something based on this architecture, and that became the chip on the Xbox, the MCPX, which is like Pro Tools on a chip. It's 256 voices of sample playback. It's got 3 DSPs on it. So we wanted to put a recording studio inside of Xbox. The other thing was we really wanted surround to happen. There was a bunch of work done with sort of virtual surround sound over headphones. If anybody's heard the term HRTF or virtual audio, that's what the sound card boards of the 90s was all about. And we're like, that's not going to work in the living room. In the living room, this was the beginning, right? When we were designing the Xbox, DVDs were only like 5 years old. And DVDs were what introduced surround sound into people's living rooms. And so, you know, anybody who cared about audio as a media enthusiast, you know, had a receiver and they set up their surround speakers, and the only formats typically were supported were Dolby and DTS. So we knew we had to have, somehow the Xbox had to speak the surround language that exists in people's living rooms right now. And so that ended up being Dolby. And when I first talked to Dolby about this was back when we were trying to get Windows into the living room. Yes. I'm horrified every time I think about that. And so the first meeting I have, remember, because it was at GDC in Long Beach in 1998. Dolby basically said, there's no way we can get the latency low enough. In other words, from the time the game wants to make a sound and it goes through the Dolby process and out to the speakers, they're like, that's going to be way too long. We can't do it like this. And so we kind of let it go. But then when Xbox came back, we sort of reconnected with them. And it turned out one of their senior vice presidents had this very clever idea about how they could do something very sneaky. And actually, he patented it, where it became actually possible to render the sound in the game instantly and with pretty low latency, encode it into Dolby Digital, send it out of the Xbox to the optical out, into the receiver, and then out the speakers. Now, nowadays, it's no big deal. You use HDMI and your Dolby Atmos, but it was a lot of work. And it was a pretty big marketing point of the Xbox that we had interactive surround encoding. It was a big press release.
So on that exact subject, the original Xbox notoriously had a pretty powerful sound chip. Would you go ahead and maybe describe it a little bit? What was it like? How did it come into being? It was something that was a collaboration with NVIDIA, where NVIDIA was basing it off of this design that you'd initially had. Can you kind of walk us through that MCPX chip?
Yeah, it depends how geeky you want to get.
How geeky do we want to get?
Okay.
Geeky.
That's,
All right.
So there were three main DSP sections on the Xbox. One was hard-coded gates, so in other words, non-programmable. And that was the main synthesis block. So every sound kind of gets, think of it as, you know, you hit a key on a keyboard and a sound comes out. It's the oscillator. And we wanted a lot of them. All the PlayStation 2 did was take two PlayStation 1 chips and basically glue them together.
Well, it's PlayStation 2, so.
I guess that's true. So the core synthesis block, and I think the PlayStation 2 could play 48 concurrent sounds, and we're like, that's not enough. And we actually had to fight on this because they're like, why would you need that many sounds? People can only comprehend about 6 or 8 sounds. And so we had to kind of tell people, no, the way we envision game sounds being isn't just a sound as a wave file. A gunshot sound might be 9 different waves that play at the same time that are different parts of the gunshot sound. The dry barrel, the main flash, the distant reverberant ring, and we want to be able to have those as separate components, and they thought that was kind of stupid. But
the way we do things now, yeah, so they were wrong.
That's kind of how we do it. So we wanted lots of voices, so 256 voices. We still were interested in this HRTF thing, so we do have the ability, there's hardware HRTF encoding into the thing. We can do 64 voices of HRTF encoded. It's got every voice has a dedicated programmable filter. It's a Chamberlain filter, which is sometimes called the musician's low-pass filter. It uses separate filter send to do occlusion filtering. So the sound goes behind the wall as opposed to, There was a game in '97 called Outlaws, not Star Wars Outlaws. This was just a game called Outlaws that LucasArts did.
Thank you, Outlaws, strongest soldiers
Yeah.
in the back.
Yes.
Oh.
Yep. And one of the funny things about that game is it was one of the first to use the Windows audio, they called it Direct Sound 3D, so that you could actually assign a position in XYZ space for a sound. But it didn't have any notion of geometry, like where walls are, and so, you could have the bad guy be right outside the cabin, and you'd hear him like he was right next to you, even though, like, you can't see him. It's like, where's that coming from? Oh, he's on the other side of the wall. And so we wanted to have some filtering that could mimic that impression of sounds being muffled by being occluded and obstructed and so on. So we have filters for that. Excuse me. Then we had a dedicated programmable DSP. For the Ultra Geeks, it was a Motorola 56300 core, which if anybody used Pro Tools in the 90s, that was the chip. That was the digital audio chip for a better part of a decade and a half. So that was just dedicated for DSP effects, reverbs, flangers, chorus, things like that. And most of that was already on the chip that NVIDIA had designed. The things that we had to have them add, which were a little bit weird, was one is a audio data compression, so we can get more audio data in less memory. That was not that bad. But then to do this Dolby thing, we actually had to stick an entire extra DSP core dedicated to do nothing but surround sound. And that was not a cheap decision to make as far as Xbox hardware goes. And you can say, hey, what's a couple dollars or $5 extra per Xbox, something like that. But when there's 25 million Xboxes, the decision to do that, suddenly you realize that cost $80 million. But it was an important enough feat. And I'm making that number up. I don't remember it. I didn't see the budget. I'm not disclosing any confidential information.
You can put down the sniper rifle. It's okay. It's good.
Yeah. So, the main those are the big things. Put a recording studio in the box and real-time interactive digital surround sound.
And obviously 18 months, very tight timeline to do that, and you have to account for the manufacturing time as these things go into it. I'm curious if there were any instances where the limits of the time that you were going up to were bumping right up to that manufacturing deadline. Were there any decisions where things had not locked in as you were about to make that call, where maybe something could or could not ship on the console if it wasn't decided on the spot?
Yeah, that was a big one. So, and I love our Microsoft business people, and I love my friends at Dolby. It's a wonderful company. Everybody I know who ever has worked there is wonderful people. In the year 2000, the world was an interesting place from both a Dolby perspective and a Microsoft perspective. If you wanted to make a Windows PC, if you're Dell or Compaq or something like that, or Gateway, did anybody remember Gateway computers? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a Gateway. I had a 46 Gateway. I was so excited. But if you wanted to make a Windows PC, you had to license Windows from Microsoft. And they would say, here's our contract. Sign it. Oh, you want something changed? Well, you don't have to make a Windows PC then. So that was kind of the mindset.
They were very direct and blunt.
Yeah. You could not make changes to Microsoft's contract. This is what it is. You want to make a Windows PC? Here's the rules. At the time, Dolby was kind of in the same boat. If you wanted to make a DVD player, in order to get the DVD logo and call yourself a DVD player, you had to license Dolby Digital, Dolby Dolby Surround Decoding. And Dolby's lawyers were all of the mindset, oh, you'd like to make a DVD player. Here's our contract. If you don't want to sign it or make any changes to it, then, well, you don't have to make a DVD player. We just won't give you the Dolby technology. So the tech side was really interesting. A lot of interesting stuff with that. But the business side of working with Dolby, trying to get these two companies who were just so used to not having to make any alteration to business decisions was, I spent half of my time at Microsoft on the Xbox with lawyers. Seriously, as much as I did engineering, I was talking with business people, and you know, they finally realized, okay, we're going to have to try and work together somehow. I don't believe Dolby had ever done a deal with Microsoft before.
How close to the wire did this get?
So we started talking with we started talking with Dolby, well, if you go back to 98 at GDC.
You've been talking with them from before there was an Xbox.
Yeah, from before there was an Xbox. When we got serious, it was about a year, because it was a long time to develop, and we had to work these weird prototype systems. And then I was in the business director's office, and we had a call from the general manager of hardware. He was down in Mexico, where the factory was. And he said, we have 2 molds for the Xbox. One of them has the Dolby logo on it, one of them doesn't. We need to know by tomorrow at 8 o'clock which one to start using to make the Xboxes.
So this might have been a last-minute decision locked in.
So that was kind of the forcing function so that evening, we agreed. We told them to go with the version with the Xbox logo on it. And then they signed the contract, FedExed it over. And by sheer coincidence, that next day, I think it was because we had started our initial manufacturing, there was an all-hands meeting. And literally, we signed the Xbox Dolby agreement in front of everybody at the all-hands. That was a pretty fun,
that's amazing.
fun moment.
So, speaking of in an all hands in front of everyone, what was the vibe like for the team? Like, what was kind of the energy and atmosphere for people who were working on that original Xbox?
We were determined to beat Sony. That was our mandate. It's like, right? Because Sony was really trying to play up Microsoft is stuffy. Microsoft is for productivity, right? PCs at the time were called workstations. That's one of the reasons the PlayStation is called the PlayStation, is to contrast it to the workstation. Right? You don't play. Why would you play games on your workstation? Which is what Windows was trying to do. They wanted to be a gaming platform. You know, you should play games on your PlayStation, not your workstation. So yeah, we very much had we are going to beat Sony. We are going to ship a superior console. We're going to get some killer launch titles. And from an audio perspective, we're just going to utterly crush them.
Which y'all did, to be fair. I think that's one of the things that for those of us who in the audience had the original Xbox,
Ooh.
and who remembers the difference in the audio experience between the original Xbox and the PlayStation 2.
Oh, you blew a speaker. All right.
Which was banger, by the way. Where is my Crimson Skies sequel? Actually, that brings on to a question that I want to ask. You mentioned developer relations earlier. Were you in touch with launch title teams, projects that were being developed for Xbox, so on? I imagine you had to be telling and teaching them a lot of this technology in the first place.
Yeah, it was kind of a fun thing, right? Because we're trying to bring up a console that doesn't exist, and how do you write software for a console that doesn't exist? How do you do? I mean, the MCPX, we didn't get final Xbox hardware until the summer before we launched. That was the first time we actually had a thing that was an actual Xbox. A very smart group was in charge of the developer experience, and of course, how does the developer develop an Xbox game when there is no Xbox? And so there was this very carefully, deliberately planned series of, starting with just a stock Windows PC, then a Windows PC with a bunch of stuff removed, then some early pre-Xbox hardware that did not yet have all the chips yet, and then finally the actual Xbox dev kits. So if you're working on Halo, you're not working on an Xbox, you're working on one of these early prototype things. And so for audio, when we finally did get an actual developer Xbox kit that actually had our sound chip in it, because we couldn't emulate this thing. You could not emulate the MCPX on like 10 Xbox CPUs. So we were, kind of, in fact, one of the launch titles, Munch's Odyssey, actually used in the prototype stage a whole separate Windows PC just as their audio server.
Which speaks to how powerful this was at that point in time.
Which let them use some of the features we said were going to be there when the hardware comes, except that it's just running on this extra piece of hardware. So they did a bunch of kind of cool stuff for that.
That is so cool.
But so yeah, it was, and some of the teams were very persnickety. So I've known Marty O'Donnell since probably like '96. He and I are both from Chicago, so I knew him before Microsoft Bungie. So if everybody knows the story, Microsoft officially greenlit the Xbox. One of the titles we wanted to get as a launch title was Halo. It's kind of crazy because nobody thought Halo was going to be like the thing. Everybody was like, how are you going to play FPS with like a controller? It's not going to work. So Microsoft bought Bungie lock, stock, and barrel from Chicago for $30 million. Like deal of the century.
Pretty decent deal.
I think they paid 10 times that much for Rare a couple years later. That's not supposed to say that. Oops.
That's all right.
Rewind. So Marty was very, very interested in surround sound. In fact, he would tell me later that the only reason he moved his family with Bungie to work on Xbox is because he heard the Xbox had surround sound in it. And he later found out how close we came to not having surround sound in the Xbox, and he said he would have been really not very happy. But so when we did get hardware in, he really put it through its paces because he knew what he wanted to do well ahead of time. And he actually found some audio bugs in our system that our audio test team just completely missed.
The Halo music literally went so hard it broke parts of the Xbox at certain points.
It wouldn't go quite that far.
Wouldn't go that far, but
yeah. But no, he was very careful in terms of, according to, what the programmer says, the way he's calling the API, I should be getting, minus 12 dB peak to peak. I'm getting minus 18. Where's that? Where's this missing 6 dB? And we're like, oh, I guess we need to fix that. Basically the entire system, it turns out, was accidentally calibrated 6 dB too high. So it really wouldn't have made any difference to the entire world if we had shipped with this bug. All it would have meant that all your Xbox games are a little bit louder. But Marty found this bug, and he's like, no. If Direct Sound says it's playing the sound at 0 dB, I want it to be 0 dB coming out the digital audio out. And so he was the only one who actually took the time to do all that stuff.
That's amazing. I will also say your fun fact of the day, Bungie, the sale price for Bungie, you could multiply that by 2,300.
$3.9 billion, yeah.
No, if you do it 2,300, you end up getting the sale price for Activision Blizzard.
Oh, for Activision Blizzard, yes, sorry.
Which, yikes. So, a general question. Any favorite memories?
It was, again, the whole thing was just incredible. Again, it was like being in a startup, except Uncle Bill is writing a lot of checks. So we didn't really have to worry about. It's not that we had carte blanche, but we didn't waste time figuring out how to not waste money. We had to be frugal, but
there was a mandate.
There was a mandate. We had to ship November for Christmas 2001, or it made no sense to even enter the market. So I loved going around. I did 2 literal circumnavigate the globe talks to like Japanese developers, and I gave my first attempt at giving a technical talk in Japanese, which didn't so good. Let's just say my Japanese was translated into Japanese by the translator.
As I'm sure you would have got when you were there. Nihongo Jozu. I'm
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
Sure
yeah.
would have been great.
Yeah.
I also want to note, you didn't just work on the original Xbox. You actually stayed on with Microsoft. You worked on the 360, and you contributed after you left Microsoft to the Xbox One. So could you tell us a little bit about the nature of your roles as things evolved into the 360 and into the Xbox One, and what it was like essentially revisiting a problem that you launched and solved, going back into a new console based on architecture to some degree from the first console.
Sorry, these are random slides and words. This is actually the timing of the startup sound.
It was also cool.
That I made. Sorry, it's a little out of sequence. So we made this great chip, and we did have a problem, is that every composer and sound designer we talked to totally got it and understood how to use it. And we had exposed all of the new custom features of this chip, so they were available via what's called API. So a programmer can say, play this sound, set the filter to this, route it to this DSP effect, and so on. And a lot of the chip was going unused in the early titles. So we had this competitive advantage that was going underutilized. And so what we decided to do was sort of change the paradigm. Because the problem is that while the programmers understood it, while the composers and sound designers totally got it and really were excited about it, the composers, the programmers didn't really get it. And it was a lot of work to try and take what, the Munches people wanted to do, or the even Fusion Frenzy people wanted to do, translate it from composer speak to programmer speak, and then get enough of a programmer's time to code from scratch in C a little system to do this thing that they wanted it to do. And so you had to come up with a business case, and so I had to write a little manifesto about how we wanted to change the way that audio is developed for on the Xbox. And so we ended up creating this tool called XACT. It stands for Xbox Audio Creation Tool, which looked kind of like this. And the idea was, what if we created a tool that was a fancy GUI, graphical user interface, that the sound designer could use, and it spoke sound designer language, and then it would create these files that the programmer could just use without really caring about what's going on. So for example, if the sound designer wanted to set the filter to a certain cutoff frequency with a certain Q or narrowness, set it to high pass, low pass, again, these features that the Xbox audio chip had on it, the composer and sound designer could just set these knobs here, and then that would get translated into C code that would just automatically go into the game. So this now took the necessity for the programmer understanding what the sound person wanted to do. And it really opened up the Xbox audio in a huge way. Not just with the signal processing that was suddenly actually able to be used, but also the Xbox, you recall, also had a hard drive. And the Xbox having a hard drive for audio people was wonderful, because it means we could stream sounds off a hard drive in a way that you can't stream sounds off of a DVD. And so one of the reasons that Xbox games sound as good as they do is actually just because of the hard drive. It's a relatively lowish latency storage device that was very, very big. And so we developed this system. Is anybody familiar with like Fmod or Wise? Okay.
Interactive game audio middleware to help make it easier to put audio into video games.
Yeah. So this was kind of like Wise, but we did it just for the Xbox, and it was 2001.
So
2002.
Wise before Wise.
Yeah. I actually saw Wise at GDC for the first time in 2006, and my jaw dropped. I told Simon, one of the founders, it's like, what you're showing me is like what I want XACT to be like 4 years from now. And that's when we were like, oh, wow, we're not going to compete with Wise. They had just done such a great job, and FMOD soon followed. But in terms of being able to control the audio of a game, things we kind of take for granted now. The other thing that XACT could do that was a first was you could actually be running the XACT GUI on your Windows PC, have your Xbox developer kit next to it running the game, and actually change the way the game sounds using the graphical. I could change the mix, change the filters, swap out this sound for that sound as the game was running. And again, it seems sort of, ho-hum today, but it was a big enough deal that I got to demo it to Bill. So that was probably one of my more favorite. So yeah, this is the original Xbox dev kit running XACT. The guy in the back corner is the head of Microsoft Research. But yeah, so Bill came in a few times.
Mm-hmm. And I believe he notoriously mentioned that he thought the coolest thing that he saw when he visited the office.
Yeah, so he came in one day to sort of do an Xbox audit, just spend the entire day with graphics and DevRel and everything. And at the end of that day, the entire Xbox team, again about 140 or 50 people, was in the cafeteria, and somebody just raised their hand and said, "Hey, what was the coolest thing you saw today?" And the thing that we demoed was a janky. Used the controller to play a helicopter sound hooked up to a Dolby interactive surround sound where you could use the joystick to move the helicopter around you. But it was totally janky, like the helicopter sound dropped in and out. But he said, I think it was that surround stuff. So that was probably my best day at Microsoft. They all went down from there. Xbox got big, so 360 was interesting too because we're very much still on gaming. Michael Sweet did the boot sound. Mm-hmm. It's a very, very different vibe. It was all about. It's weird. I remember marketing people saying just. They always made these breaths, mm-hmm. and they curved hands, which was of course the shape of the console. But that's when Xbox started to get big and kind of corporate, and then. You're no longer making decisions fast and doing cool stuff, and those teams that we could say, hold your hand up to and say, talk to us later. It was getting to be that later. So yeah, I got to be big and corporate. It's like, that's enough.
Internet Explorer
that's
on
enough.
Xbox or on Xbox One.
Did we ever ship it?
I have no idea.
Yeah. Oh,
I think Microsoft Edge.
I was gone by then, so. But yeah, so it was really fun to just sort of go from, hey, we're going to take on PlayStation. We're going to, again, we turned the next console pretty quick too. 360 was only 4 years after the original one. And in the middle there, we launched Xbox Live with the voice system that it.
Yeah.
I was in charge of that too. So.
I'm
sorry about that.
I'm curious about that. Were there any, and we'll go to questions after this, by the way, so if y'all want to start lining up for questions, I'm going to do one more, and then we can go ahead and transition to that. Yeah. So Xbox Live, first major online system at scale for a video game console. Obviously, Dreamcast had some degree of online presence. Windows PC obviously had an online presence. But that was the first time that a game console really, really took to the online experience at scale. Were there any technical challenges for the audio side that you had to be dealing with that were perhaps novel?
Yeah, so we wanted to make sure that every game could have voice chat, and making fun of the quality of Xbox audio voice chat notwithstanding, we had a hard mandate that a full online game experience should not exceed 64 kilobytes per second. Just kilobits per second. Right, we all got gigabit fiber in our houses right now, right? We were barely coming out of dial-up. There was even discussions, why are we even putting an Ethernet port on the Xbox? So we wanted to say that, so because of that, it had to be game data, it had to be voice data, including, routing information and stuff like that. We invented a new transport mechanism, which is kind of a cross between UDP and TCP. That's about as geeky as we're going to get on that. But for that reason, the voice data on Xbox Live is 3,200 bits per second. So it's like a a eyedropper worth of audio data that we tried to get voice through. But it was an important thing. It was, again, a key feature of Xbox Live.
That's incredible. Let's go ahead and open to questions then. Make sure to turn that microphone on, by the way.
Oh, right.
So just button on the back there. Just pull that button up.
There we go.
Hello?
There we go. We can hear you now.
So my question is sort of 2 in 1. For someone interested in getting into game audio or writing game music, what's the most important skill to develop in your view? And then also, like in your experience, how do you sort of get that bridge, like from knowing how to do stuff to like actually getting a job or an internship or?
There was an entire panel on this that you were doing with Emmanuel, right?
I'm on a panel for this in 30 minutes.
Oh, really?
Over in, I think, panel 6, Journey Through Careers in Game Audio. I will be there. I'm a former audio director at Tencent. Cole Hicks, former lead composer from Riot Games. Emmanuel Lagumbe, sound designer from Riot and ArenaNet. And John Robert Motz, former Rookie of the Year gang,
Yes, yeah.
Independent composer. We're all going to be talking about this exact subject.
Yeah.
So
rather than try and digest it into 20 seconds of response.
Can I ask a different question? Would that be okay?
Sure.
When you were doing audio for the Xbox, what was like the biggest hurdle you found, and then what's also the most important skill that you found you had that was able to get over that?
If you were like creating sounds for a game for the Xbox?
No, like when you were developing.
Oh, for me, it was the boot sound, because it's some pretty hairy programming. It's like I definitely used my CS chops. In fact, I was responsible for a bug that shut down the assembly line. It was about 1 in 1,000 times you booted the Xbox, it would just freeze, and you had to unplug it, put it back in. It turned out, if you really want to know what the bug was, and you're really geeky, the Xbox was a 386 processor with a floating point unit on it. And at the time, you were told to never do floating point calculations inside a computer interrupt routine. And I did. I had one line of code that did a little bit of floating point. And it's a timing thing, right? Usually it's totally fine. But when you're making thousands of Xboxes, and you're trying to start them up, you hit this bug. And so, yeah, I was responsible for shutting down the assembly line.
Thank you.
that'll show them.
Hello. You mentioned a good amount about how composers were working directly with Xbox and with their composing styles. What I wanted to know was did they ever tell you about the differences, what they had with working with, for example, multi-plat titles that came out on the GameCube or the PS2 or the Dreamcast, what the differences were and compared to how they were working on Xbox, if they mentioned that at all?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think I'm doing a panel with Will Roget and Jason Hayes that's going to kind of cover this a little bit, but unknowing at the time, that was right about the time where the notion of doing different audio packages for different consoles was disappearing. When I was doing our console games, my SNES project was completely different than my Genesis project of the same title.
Yep.
Desert Strike SNES, Desert Strike Genesis, two totally different projects. In fact, I got paid for them twice because they were so. That's just how we did it. And one of the challenges that we had was that titles that were trying to be cross-platform didn't want to use the specific features of the Xbox chip because it was too much of a pain in the neck to then have to write separate code for the GameCube where it didn't use it,
Yep.
or the PlayStation 2 where it didn't have access to the filter. So this was the last generation where there even was kind of a differentiation of
Yeah.
having kind of a cool sound chip.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's quite what answered the question was, though.
Well, kind of. The main thing with it was like if composers like commented about it at all when they were developing their soundtracks for specifically multi-plat releases, because again, you guys very heavily hammered home how you guys were trying to very heavily beat the PS2
Yeah.
with audio, and you obviously succeeded very, very intensely. I was just wondering if there was any differences with games that were coming out on the PS2 and the GameCube, the Dreamcast, the consoles at the time, and if there were comments from composers about like, oh, this is so much easier on Xbox, or oh, we could do so much more, and whatnot.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I talked about Exact. Around the time that Exact was being developed, Sony was developing a tool called Scream. And actually, a really great friend of mine I've known since '92 was the developer of Scream. His name was Buzz Burrows. And so Sony was, we've got 5 minutes left. So Sony was starting to create a similar tool. And so I think what they were, I know that one person, their company, wrote an Exact parser for PlayStation
Yeah.
so that they could actually write their game in Exact and
Fair
put it
enough.
on PlayStation.
All right.
So we were starting to see,
So you were starting to see the
we're starting to
bridges.
see
Okay.
stuff like that, yeah.
Fair enough.
Hello. You mentioned programmable DSP stuff, and I'm very curious about specifically the effects architecture. Like, does that mean developers could ship their own effects to run on the chip? And if so, like, what kind of stock stuff was included? And also,
What kind of what was concluded?
if there were like stock effects.
Oh,
that
yeah,
they'll ship
yeah.
And also, like, what kind of API for that? Was just like, here's an input buffer and output buffer, good luck, or
We actually had so we provided a number of stock effects.
yeah.
We had a graphical tool that let you hook effects up to one another
Oh,
and do
no-based.
routing and stuff like that.
Damn.
And the programmer, who was a friggin' wizard, he wrote some code that the reason that we're able to do that, we could actually do that even in real time. And I don't know how many programmers there are out here, but the way we did it was as the game was running, we changed the actual program instruction.
Polymorphic DSP.
So we're essentially, it's called self-modifying code.
Yeah.
Which we could never ship today because it's that'd be a big security hole. But by using self-modifying code, we had the ability to do custom routing, and I think we had 1 or 2 who actually created their own DSP effects on it.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
I mean, you guys mentioned Dreamcast earlier, and I feel like something that I've heard for a really long time is like, oh, like, why didn't they make a second Dreamcast? That's the original Xbox, basically. And I know that there's a lot of partnership that you had. I mean, there's an exclusive Crazy Taxi as a launch title, even. And you did a lot of sound work for like Sega's pinball division, a lot of Genesis stuff, and I'm just curious how that history in arcade work sort of informed the foundation of Xbox.
So it wasn't the arcade side of Sega that was dealing with Microsoft. It was
Yeah.
the Dreamcast side. And Dreamcast shipped with Windows CE. I think
Right.
a title shipped with Windows CE. The interesting backstory there is that there were actually 2 different groups at Microsoft that were tasked with coming up with what should the Xbox be. One of them was the Windows CE division. One of them was us. And there's a very famous meeting where I was not at this, but would have loved to have been at it, where the CE team came with their proposal as a PowerPoint deck. Our team came in with a running system. And that kind of put the nail on. So that's the reason that that's Dreamcast CE, that never,
Interesting.
yeah.
Thank you.
Here, I'm going to loop around.
We've got time for probably one more.
Wanted to thank you for me not having to purchase sound cards anymore. Thanks in advance. But I wanted to know, during that era of like late 90s, were there any sound systems or engines that were working specifically with Trespasser, the Jurassic Park game? If you looked at any inspiration or like, let's not do that because it's for crazy people.
I'd love to chat with you afterwards to figure out more specifically what you're talking about. There were a bunch, right? Creative Labs had EAX, or there was a chip from Oriole called A3D. It's the 8860 chip that did hardware.
Brian has an
Visual-
entire talk
Yeah, we'd actually-
about sound cards actually
Ooh.
coming up
On Sunday, yeah.
On Sunday about the sound card wars. So this would actually probably be a great question in
Yes.
that
Okay.
talk.
Never mind. Yeah. If you can go.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yes, it's 1:59.
We got 1 minute.
so-
Let's go.
Okay, I really enjoyed looking at the code for the Xbox sound, and it reminded me a lot of making music in C sounds.
Yes.
So I was curious if you had experience with that, and if you thought it was important to today to make music and the sounds with that kind of language.
Yeah, my computer music so I got super lucky. I went to Northwestern to be a tuba major, although my main instrument is really bass guitar. But by coincidence, my sophomore year, the school got a $3 million grant to study 3D hearing and create the first digital HRTF system. So we built up a computer music lab from scratch. So this is academic computer music in the 80s, which was all about Music 4, Music 5, C sound.
Nice.
And so my digital audio roots are firmly in the academic computer music C sound vibe, which is why both the arcade system and Genesis system I wrote are very much like Music 5 or C sound, and the Xbox, same thing. So,
All right.
yeah.
That's really cool.
Astute
Thank you.
question.
Everyone, thank you so much for coming. Brian has multiple other panels this weekend. I encourage you to check your schedule, check them out. He has some music that'll be getting performed by the MAGFest Community Orchestra. That's going to be really cool. Make
I get
sure
to
to check
conduct
out.
it too.
You get to conduct it too.
With